It's a great opportunity to be talking to you, Mark, today. It's our pleasure. Could you please introduce yourself and what do you do for business?
Yeah, sure. At the moment, and in fact for many years now, I've been in Bangladesh, where I work mainly in teacher training and especially in reading. Um, I've also worked for the British Council, University of Cambridge, and some major universities in this part of the world. I imagine I'll be here for the rest of my life.
Yeah,
That's it.
that's so interesting. And we hope you have a great journey forward.
Thanks so much.
Yeah. You say that teachers are not actually teaching reading at all. Why is that?
Yeah, I think that's because teachers generally, first of all, they choose texts which are too difficult, and they don't choose them for the content. They just don't choose them for their interest's sake, for their relevance to students' lives. But what they do is they choose them because, for example, they've got many examples of the passive in the second paragraph, which they want the kids to underline. Or, for example, they want to teach challenging vocabulary that they can test later. So that reading, I think, excuse me,
Yeah.
reading, I think, becomes, is kind of secondary to grammar and vocabulary practice. So that, look at reading comprehensions, for example. Most reading comprehensions are simply there because they're challenging, they're a bit too difficult for the students, because they have grammar that that the teacher would like to rehearse, or because they wish to enlarge kids' vocabulary. But the story, the relationship between the reader and what they are actually interplaying with is gone. It's all about grammar and vocabulary.
Yeah, that is so much of the case. What is wrong with reading a classic authors?
There's nothing wrong with reading classic authors. In fact, they're my favorite authors. But I'm a native user of English. I'm 60 years old. When I was 20, 15, 25, I didn't much like Dickens. Now Dickens is my favorite novelist. But asking kids to tackle 900 pages of David Copperfield written in language which is 170 years old is unrealistic. Added to which, if, for example, you're growing up in Cairo, what has Victorian London got to do with you? If you're reading Wordsworth, you know, with those bloody daffodils, I mean, the chances are, if you're growing up in Alexandria or Cairo, you've never seen a daffodil. And I think it's a very rare teacher who shows a picture of those flowers. Whereas clearly what Wordsworth wanted to do is he wanted us to picture what it was like walking through a field of wild yellow flowers. How many 16-year-old Egyptian kids know that daffodils are yellow? So surely, we always complain these days, a complaint, by the way, which I don't agree with, that students don't read. They're uninterested in reading, that reading is boring. maybe reading wouldn't be so boring if it were more connected to the 21st century, more connected to their lives, rather than relating back 200 years to a part of the world they've never visited. And I don't know about you, but personally, I don't like poetry about nature. Um, the romantic poets, well, not all of them, but Wordsworth leaves me cold. I just don't relate to it. I'm a city boy. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Why do you think that students don't actually enjoy reading?
Um, um, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that they're frightened of reading in a foreign language. And that's because almost everything we do with reading leads to exam questions, leads to some form of assessment. Um, there's the first thing. The second thing is I think we concentrate on Shakespeare. Okay, I'm sitting here in the south of Bangladesh, and a teacher says to me, in all honesty, he says, yeah, my students are especially fond of Shakespeare. Shakespeare's their favorite writer. And you say, oh, really? How old are they? And he says, well, they're 15. Well, the kids are lying because Shakespeare is not my favorite author. Um, and while, and how many of us as teachers actually go home in the evening and think, ooh, not going to talk to the wife this evening. I'm not going to watch a film. I'm not going to download on torrent. I think I'm going to read one of Shakespeare's histories. No, we don't do that. 1 in 10,000 of us actually does that. So when kids tell us that Shakespeare is wonderful, the vast majority of them are just trying to get into our good books. They're just trying to show us what good little students they are. But I'd suggest to you that if you listen to their taste in films, say Fast and Furious 7, and there they will honestly tell you, yeah, I love Fast and Furious, blah, 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 blah. And these are the same kids, are they, for whom Shakespeare is a favorite author. Fast and Furious on the one hand, Shakespeare on the other. The reason that they're free to tell us that they like Fast and Furious is because we're not assessing them on it. It's not an exam question. If we gave kids opportunities to read about ICT, about serial killers, and so on and so on, I think we could turn a lot more kids on to reading.
Yeah, that's so insightful. Why should students read below their language level?
That's an easy one. Um, Stephen Krashen, the kind of founder of communicative language teaching, he always talked about comprehensible input. Yeah, I shows us the language level of the students with whom we're interacting. And what we should do is we should aim at I+1, that the kind of opportunities we're giving them are understandable to the students. That's why, for example, if I want to learn Arabic, I don't turn on an Arabic news program. and start from there. It's too difficult. If I do it for 30 minutes every single day for 6 months, at the end of that 6 months, I'm still not going to know much Arabic. Maybe I'll have picked up good evening, goodbye. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But I'm not going to understand, for example, about the pulling down of Columbus's statues in Chicago. And that's because the input is way beyond the foundation in the language that I have. And therefore, I'm not going to learn it. I+1. But what Krashen went on to say, and Krashen actually believed that reading was the best way to acquire language skills. Of all the skills he could have chosen, it was reading that he said was the most important. By the way, first language and second language. But there he suggested that we should have I-1, that we should be giving kids something that's a little bit below their language level. Why? Because what we want to do with reading is we want to encourage automatic recognition of vocabulary. And therefore, if I say to you, for example, here is a word, it starts like this, B, E, C. What's the word going to be? Because, become, became. Okay, it might be beckon, but the chances of that are remote. Probably it's because, become, became. And when we're reading, we actually read 5 times faster than the fastest speed at which we can speak. And we do that because we're not reading all the words. We're jumping over. So for example, interested in, because of, good, at, bored with. We know the prepositions that come after these adjectives, and therefore we don't need to read them. If we're reading slightly below our level, it encourages that automatic recognition of words. Whereas if we're reading, for example, something like, the difficulty with living in Bangladesh is that it's prone to concatenation. We're not encouraging the recognition of those words because prone to is probably above their level, and certainly concatenation is. Yeah. I can demonstrate this to you, I hope, relatively easily. Just give me a second. I'm going to show something to you now. Okay. I'm going to flash it up on the screen, and I'm going to flash it up for 2 seconds. Right?
Yeah.
So get ready. Okay. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Here we go. What did it say? Too fast?
Yeah.
I'll give it to you again.
I think it's Paris something. Paris in the spring.
Yeah, Paris in the spring. Now look again.
Yeah.
Well, it isn't Paris in the spring, is it? It's Paris in the spring. But you didn't read the second the, did you?
No.
And that's what I mean about reading. We're not actually reading every single word. What we're doing is we're looking at the words and we're saying, right, that's what it is. Yep, we're guessing most of the words. And that's why we can read quickly, because what the eye sees is not what the brain takes in. The brain is working and saying, that's what it means. making us think we have read Paris in the Spring, whereas in fact there's an extra definite article there. If I'd written something like Prone to Concatenation, you wouldn't have been able to read it at all. Yeah. Therefore, we should read slightly below our language level. And there's a great point about this that Krashen makes. As I've already said, Dickens is my favorite novelist. And maybe, for example, you like Najib Mahfouz, just as an example. At the moment, I'm reading a guy called Amitav Ghosh. One of his very early works was when he was a PhD student from India, living in a village in Egypt. And he's talking about, you know, right? Here's my point. You can read soft pornography, or you can read a love story about doctors and nurses, something with no literary merit whatsoever, and it will help your English just as much as reading my Amitav Ghosh, reading Steinbeck, reading Hemingway, reading a Booker Prize winner. Literary merit does not help us to improve our language skills. It's not the quality of what we read, it's the quantity.
Yeah, very true. What is the five-finger test?
Five-finger test, right. When we say to kids, you know, try to read something which isn't too difficult for you, how do they judge? And this is how they judge. They hold up five fingers. They open a book at random. They look at any page in that book, okay? And every time they don't know a word, they drop a finger, okay?
Yeah.
If they can't, if they need more than five fingers to get to the end of the page, it's probably too difficult for them.
Oh, yeah, yeah, like
a rule. It's a rule of thumb.
Yeah, then a lot of our books are really not suitable for the student.
Yeah, yeah. Do you buy second-hand books in English?
Yeah, sometimes.
Yeah, and you must have noticed then that people have written translations of words in Arabic in an English text, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, how long do those notes go on for? Because I don't think I've ever bought a second-hand book where on page 1 and page 220, there are still Arabic notes or Bangla notes here. It's because people get fed up after 5 pages or 10 pages looking at Google, looking at the dictionary,
Yeah.
and they give up. And what we should be trying to do more than anything is encourage kids to read. By kids, I mean anybody younger than 40.
then I am too young. Too
You, for
young.
example. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's a very nice interview. Okay. How important is it for students to read a lot?
Well, okay. One would hope that students would enjoy reading. At the moment here in Bangladesh, I have a student called Jubair. I think he's 21, 22 years old. And he loves film. So not only has he watched Fast and Furious, but he's also watched black and white films from the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. Yeah, the Dracula films made by Jimmy Whale, or 12 Angry Men, yeah, with Henry Fonda. And, you know, I said to him, how did you get into all this? And he said, I started watching films, downloading, and he said, and I wanted to improve my English. And he said, but then the cinema took over and the English became secondary. And I hope that's the way with reading. My dad grew up in the Second World War and was Polish and therefore did not go to school. And my mother, who's English, left school at 14. So there were no books in our house, yeah. And I was lucky I had an English teacher, and he said to me, what are you reading? And I said, Great Expectations. And he said, no, 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 no. He said, we're reading that in class. He said, what are you reading for pleasure? And I had no idea what he meant, because for me, reading was only about school and exams. I only read what I had to read. And he said to me, oh, he said, no, 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 no. He said, you must read. He said, because there are going to be times in your life, he said, where you have an argument at work, when your wife divorces you because you've been unfaithful, and you will find that all of your friends, who of course are also her friends, suddenly become your enemies. And he said, and you will be left alone. You may have experienced this, Nour, I don't know. That was that was a joke, Nour. But he said, books, he said, if you make friends with them now, he said, they will never ever desert you. They will be your friends no matter what you've done, through thick and thin. And he said, and the important thing about books is that they stress our humanity, that we can read Daniel Defoe, or we can read Tolstoy, or we can read whoever. And that person may be separated from us by a continent, by a couple of centuries. But as we're reading, we go, oh God, that's exactly what I'm feeling at the moment. And therefore we know we are not alone in the world. And that surely is a much greater aim than just learning a foreign language. But somehow we've got to connect with the books in order to get comfort, solace, and hope and inspiration from them.
Perfect. Which is better, reading from a screen or the printed pages?
Makes no difference at all.
Perfect.
Makes absolutely no difference at all. That Dickens, if you read Dickens from Kindle, if you read Dickens from a book, Dickens is still Dickens is still Dickens. And teachers who tell you that you can only really focus or understand Dickens if you've got those 900 pages in your hand are talking rubbish. That's to do with our expectation. So, for example, if we go on to you know, it's like a remote control. I'm watching this really, really fantastic film. But every now and again, I'll click and see what's on another channel, even though I'm really enjoying the film. And that's the same, say, with Facebook. how long, how often do you post something and people like it? Yeah, you've posted 200 words and they like it 3 seconds after you've posted it. And you know they have not read, they're just liking it because you're their teacher, because you're their friend, because they think you're attractive or something. Yeah, they're not doing it because they've read. And therefore, the internet, if you like, is very, very, very fast. But if we are focused and we want to, in Bangladesh, it's really, really hard to get books. And original books are unbelievably expensive. Yeah, you can pay $20 in Bangladesh for a modern English novel, if you can find it. Well, then obviously we have to read on the screen, and by illegally downloading PDFs. There is no choice. And therefore we're focused and we're concentrated because it becomes the norm. Yeah? This idea that we have no attention span on a computer is all to do with our own expectations of going on the computer. It's got nothing to do with science, nothing to do with research findings.
Yeah, great. How can students encourage each other to read?
Given that teachers very often recommend books which are too difficult for kids, maybe a better source of recommendation is other children the same age. And therefore, I think getting kids to write positive or negative reviews of books in, say, 50 words and sticking them on a library shelf at school is helpful. Secondly, reading circles are great. Reading circles are great, though, but we got to be careful. Like with all group work, very often children, you know, the boy who's out in the street whistling at girls rather than reading the novel at home has to rely on his hard-working friend in order to do well in class. And therefore probably never reads the book, just gets a synopsis from his friend. So when we're making those reading circles, we've got to make sure that everybody has a very specific role, which it's difficult to avoid. And if we do that, I think we can encourage discussion about the novel or about a poem or about a short story by forming reading circles. There are many other ideas as well, but there's two for you.
Yeah. What else would you like to say?
Nothing really. I've said enough, I think, but it, it, it seems to me a great shame that when we have the internet, I have just written a general introduction to science, and I knew absolutely nothing about